This is an interview with Brian Burns, PhD candidate at the University of Washington and founder of the AI Pub Twitter account. Now, with over 60,000 followers, Brian is trying to build a talent referral business out of it. Brian also hosts a podcast where he explains research papers with the authors. In this interview, we go over all these different facets: the PhD, having a Twitter account, the podcast, and more. I hope you enjoy it. Who are you and what's your background?
Sure. My name's Brian. I run this Twitter account called AI Pub, an associated podcast called Deep Papers. What do I do with the Twitter account? I cover like high level technical AI topics. So it's like AI research, but not going like super deep in the weeds, but also for people who have a technical background. And then the podcast is like interviewing AI scientist of like recent, like very interesting papers, also like on a technical but high level. Um, my background before that I'm on leave from a machine learning PhD within the stats department at UW. I did a year of a stats PhD, picked up a lot of like deep learning stuff, some computer vision stuff, and started this Twitter account. It blew up, and I'm kind of running with it. So that's my background.
We will definitely dive into the podcast and the Twitter account, which is my main interest here. But I also want to take a small detour into the PhD just because I'm myself doing one. And I know that a lot of people listening are either doing one or considering doing one. So I'd love to know why. Well, first, what was your reason in starting one?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I feel like my situation is kind of weird. Like for me, I wanted to break into machine learning. I didn't have. I had a programming background. I'd been programming since I was a little kid or teenager. I had a very, very strong math background. So like growing up, I wanted to be a mathematician, and like in university, was kind of on the track to like do a math PhD.
Mm.
I wanted to break into machine learning. Like I thought that basically like doing a statistics PhD, like in a department that had a really good machine learning program would be a good way to do that. So that's like so I ended up applying to a bunch of grad schools and I got into UW. So that's kind of like why I started it.
So to transition from mathematics into something more applied?
Yeah, I wanted to like learn a bunch, and like grad schools are like a really cool opportunity where you get paid enough to pay rent and buy food, and you can use a lot of your time, not all of your time, but a lot of your time to learn. So
Mm.
for me, it was really useful.
Would you say that it was maybe more useful than directly going into some industry roles? Like, what's the difference for you, or why did you choose the graduate studies path instead of going straight into the industry?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that's a good question. I think in hindsight, I didn't understand the breadth of opportunities that are available. Um, I definitely think that having the credential really helps. Even
Mm.
if you do a fraction of a PhD like I have, I'm on leave. I almost certainly am not going to finish. Having that credential or having a master's degree or something, it does help. But I do think there are kind of a lot of ways to break in, and I definitely don't think that the PhD is necessary at this point,
Mm.
especially given how quickly things are moving and how quickly kind of the dominant paradigms of AI and machine learning are changing.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessary. So definitely, like in hindsight, I don't think it's necessarily the optimal path, and I think for a lot of people, it's definitely not.
Yeah. And do you think, regarding the optimal path, do you think, like, yeah, of course, the credential helps, but do you think the 4 years put into it, well, like minimum of 4 years or something like this, put into it is worth the 4 years that you could have put into either working on your own thing or working at a startup? Because let's say you won't be able to enter Google right away if you don't have studies, but like, do you think the time invested in the PhD is worth the certification?
I think it just really depends on what your end goals are. Because I think there are a lot of reasons people will pursue a PhD, or kind of you want to do something in machine learning. I mean, if your goal is just to like learn and do novel research in machine learning, I think like if you can get into a PhD program or somehow fund yourself as an independent researcher, or even like work with these open source labs like Stability AI, I think that's the best path. Like
Mm,
if you just want to do research, like there's kind of not there's not a huge societal slot for you unless you either do a PhD or you join one of these open source research orgs. Um, I think for many of the other things you want to do, I don't think it's optimal. Like I think if you want to just like get on the ground running and learn how a lot of these modern machine learning systems work and like find good work in the area, I think you can learn a lot of this stuff really quickly on your own, or even
mm.
on your job. So I think for the vast majority of situations, I wouldn't recommend it. But I think if you wanted, if you're really dead set on doing research and you can get into a good PhD program, I think it's probably the optimal path. Um, and then the other thing is like again, like the world is changing so much. Like now there are these really cool open source labs. Like I have a lot of friends who are like software engineers or machine learning engineers where they want to increase their research chops. So what they do is instead of leaving for grad school, they just start working with like Carper AI in their spare time. So I think even if you're trying to do research, I think there are alternate paths there.
Yeah, definitely. And I don't know what will happen with universities in general, but we will see. And I also think, well, I assume, not I assume, it's obvious that if you want to become a professor as well, it's pretty much necessary. Like if your goal
Oh
is
yeah,
to
definitely.
teach, it definitely helps. And well, it's not necessary. You can become like an online professor or something, but if you want to teach at university, it's definitely required. And to me, that, well, after speaking with many people, I think even doing research, as you said, might be might not be the optimal path. The PhD might not be the optimal path. You may be even better if you are able to find some research position elsewhere. And the main reason to do a PhD might be to become a professor, and
Yep.
the second one to do research, which may not even be the optimal path to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you want to do research, doing a PhD is kind of the mainline way to do it. Like I think there are alternate paths, but like whatever, 80-90% of people who are trying to pursue research and who can get into some kind of PhD program, like I think that's probably the safest bet and the most
Yeah,
straightforward way to do it. That would be my guess.
yeah. It's also, but it's definitely worth doing if you enjoy doing it. Like
Yeah.
it's definitely, if you like to control your own work and pace. And for example, if you want to take 8 years to do well, I don't know what's the maximum length, but if you want to do for example 7 years instead of 4, but work 20 hours per week, most times you can. Well,
Yeah.
here in Canada you can. So like it's definitely a good thing if you are more, I don't know. That's a bit weird, but I can see a comparison between the PhD and entrepreneurship, where you pretty much decide on what you are doing and you decide on your schedule and you work on what you want to work. So that's also pretty cool. And the the flexibility that you have is amazing to work on side projects just like yours. So I
Yeah.
feel like it may be a good, like, safe backup plan while trying other stuff at the same time.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that 100%.
And so you mentioned it, but I assume you most certainly will not go back to the PhD and continue it.
Yeah, I would say so. I think I've kind of explored this weird alternate path of, like social media is just so cool. Like I just have met all of these different people in social media over the last 6 months or so, 7 months since starting the account. Like I have this little recruiting business that's going well. There's so many kind of opportunities that I feel like are here, that I think at least for me, I think like I don't necessarily want to do another 4 years.
Mm, yeah,
Um,
that makes sense.
but it's very, very different because I think for me, like I entered the PhD to kind of break into machine learning, and I think after the first like 6 months to a year, I felt like I had learned enough to go out on my own.
Yeah.
But I think like I was not dead set on like doing world class language modeling research or something like that. And I think for someone else, if that's your aim, then staying is really the right move.
Mm. Yeah, and it's definitely something that you are, like, in a PhD, you are specializing yourself in something extremely specific, and that's, well, that brings value, but it may not be for everyone.
Yeah. And it's also, I mean, this was one of the things that like blew my mind the most about machine learning, kind of the history of machine learning is almost the trend of anti-specialization with time. Like most fields as they go on, you know, they get more and more niche. It's like if you do like a physics PhD or something, you know, you specialize in like theoretical quark string theory type B or something, and you do like 7 years on that. Whereas the really interesting thing with ML over the last like 10 years, you know, post deep learning, and especially with the kind of like you know, transformer sequence modeling paradigm, is like this unification of architectures, right? Where it's like,
Yeah,
you know, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but it's like 10 years ago, like people were doing computer vision, people who were doing like NLP were doing like very, very different things. And now like a lot of the methods are actually becoming more and more similar. So it's also kind of an interesting time to like think about specialization or like really deep
yeah,
specialization, you know. Um,
yeah. And I've read a great book. Well, listened to a great audiobook about I don't remember the name exactly, but it's like why generalists triumph or something like this, which was really interesting and about how generalists are often the ones that succeeds even in some very specific fields. For example, I remember one of the example he gave was Roger Federer, the tennis player. He they in the book he wrote about his background and said that like um, compared to other tennis professional players, Roger Federer was playing like every other sports and some tennis until he was, yeah, I will say random numbers, but until his teens or something, compared to others that like at 6 they already started only playing tennis and nothing else, whereas he was playing a lot of different sports and developing different skills. And so I don't know, I'm biased towards the generalization because I just like touching a lot of stuff, but I feel like there's definitely some value to staying a bit more general, or at least even if you are focused on one area, still getting out of your way to understand the different things that are happening or developing in other industries.
oh yeah, I mean, yeah, I see this a little bit in recruiting as well. Like I do talent referrals to different AI startups, and I think like the candidates that I find like get the most job offers or like end up like progressing in their careers the fastest, they're definitely not like total generalists. Like they tend to be really good at one thing, right?
Yeah,
You know, they tend to be like really, really good at NLP and like have a long history of projects and like, you know, successful work history doing that kind of thing. But I think it's kind of like they're not entirely T-shaped. It's like they're really good at one thing, but then for basically everything else they also are like good enough or actually like even a little bit beyond that. So it's like they're really good at NLP, but then like they're also like really fun to work with, and you know they have at least some social media profiles showing off their work, and like they
yeah,
network every once in a while, you know. So that I've noticed like that additional kind of marginal stuff kind of across the skill distribution like really helps people in their careers.
yeah. Or even, for example, just for myself in my internships and things like that, if you are good at something else, it can also help. Just I remember that I we, I wrote in my resume that I was doing some climbing, and like one of the interviewer was a big climbing fan, and we just talked about this during the whole interview, and I ended up getting the job, and we just went climbing, and it was perfect. Like I feel like a lot of recruiting is based on not preferences, but like just it's just like finding a friend basically.
Yeah.
You want to match with the person, you like the person can learn, and as long as he or she's motivated, it should be fine. So so you definitely try to find a good fit, but you are the recruiter expert. So what what would you say that it's most important when matching, so like I don't know, matching a company with an individual? Like, are what would you say that companies are looking for mostly? Is it strictly the skills, or the personality is even more important? What's the most important thing?
Oh man, that's so hard because I don't think there's any one specific thing, and I think there's also selection for a lot of different roles, right?
Yeah,
Like, I think what gets you ahead as a research engineer is different from what gets you ahead as a software engineer or research scientist. So, I do think I think it varies a lot across roles. But let me answer directly. So I think so. There's kind of like two levels of this. Like I think first and foremost, I think just like having impressive technical accomplishments on your resume is really useful. Like this is just very standard recruiting advice, but it's just like you've shipped a bunch of projects with like very quantifiable impact. It's
Yeah,
like you saved N dollars a year for your business, for your employer, or you sped up X service by X%, or you improved X model's performance from A to B. So I think that stuff matters first and foremost. I hate to say it, but I think second is like brand. I think recruiter, like people who are hiring CEOs of startups, recruiters, like the name on the resume matters a lot. Like if you're working at whatever Google, Facebook, or like a big startup, Stripe, Airbnb, or something like that it really greases the wheels to get you in the door. Whether or not people like that. The other thing to say about the brand stuff is I think it's more in your control than you think. So it's like it's harder to change whatever company. Like maybe you can't work for a really prestigious company, but um, I think if you end up going on social media and you make a profile for yourself and you like share really cool work of yours, you have like a really slick website. There's a way that actually can really like alter people's perceptions of you and like
yeah,
show off stuff that doesn't show in the resume. So I think second is brand, like below the technical stuff. Um, and then I think third, the thing that really helps with recruiting is kind of exactly what you said. It's actually a lot of this like really like non-scalable social stuff. It's really funny, I think. And again, I'm like not an expert with recruiting. I've been doing this for maybe 6 months or something, 5 months. Um, there's all this stuff like there's job boards, there's the job application page, and one of the things I've learned is that just like a lot of this stuff just gets totally ignored. There's just so much volume on the internet that like these job boards or these job applications just get totally filled up, and often the CEOs or the hiring managers are so overwhelmed that they just don't even look at the applications
yeah,
at all. Like it's really surprising. So like the funny thing is kind of I think the thing I've learned about recruiting and like job stuff is like if you want to get good at it, you have to get good at like all the old school stuff. So just like networking or like finding out who the hiring manager is on LinkedIn and like sending them a really nice cold email about why you think you're great for this position. So that kind of thing. So to recap, one, technical stuff matters the most. Two, brand. Three, like non-scalable, old school social stuff. I think referrals too, like having a friend who's part of the
yeah.
company, something like that.
And I'd say like fourth, that is outside of your CV, would be your online presence, as you mentioned. Just it's really important to be to be visible, basically.
It's nuts. I mean, and I'm sure you've experienced this. Like just the kind of opportunities it opens up, or the people
Yeah,
you meet. It's totally bonkers. Totally bonkers.
yeah. It's really like if you guys are not on either Twitter or LinkedIn, just go create an account right now and at least share what you've done in the past year or something. Just be online a little bit. And if you are coding on GitHub, you can also put it to just public, and if you can put your code to public and clean it a bit before. But yeah, it's really a game changer to have an online presence, especially in this new field that where we see, for example, I've interviewed someone, the VP of research and development at a startup called DID, and he said that for a research scientist role, they received in the thousands of like um, potential candidates that were
Yep.
qualified.
Really nuts.
That's just crazy. Like they cannot go through all of them, so definitely you
Yeah.
need to stand out one way or the other. And as you said, either by reaching out and sending a personalized letter, or at least use ChatGPT or something to write it like more personal, but like not spam them, but at least send something that seems personal is already a good step to get out of the lot, out of the bunch. So
Yep.
you mentioned that, yeah, we talked about recruiting and talent referral. What is, I believe, your current business, so or like main business model maybe, but what does this mean exactly? What are you doing and how do you do that? How are you matching people and finding candidates and everything around that?
Yeah, it's actually quite simple, and a lot of it I'm still experimenting with it, and I think there are a lot of different things that can be done. But at least for now, how it works is I just have a link on my Twitter page, and people can click on the link, and they'll submit some information about themselves, their name, what company they're working at, like what they're looking for in their next role, um, and then typically like if they meet certain parameters, and I'm explicit about this stuff. It's like fortunately or unfortunately, almost all the startups I refer to are in the US. So it's like if they're in the US and they have like 2 years of experience, and they submit that stuff, I'll reach out to them for like a phone or a Zoom call just to get a better sense of what they're looking for. Um, and then I'm just kind of like a passive matchmaker. So like at that point, maybe I'll really understand what they're looking for, and I'll already know a company that's a good match. Or it's happened where it's like we chat. I don't actually know anyone who's a great fit for them, but then like 3 months later, I meet a startup founder who's like looking for someone who, they
Yeah.
fit their profile. So then I just put people in touch via email, and that's how it works. I've started to. There's one company I've been recruiting for. I won't say much about them, but they're like really cool. I'm like a huge fan of them. You can probably guess who they are if you like follow me on social media. I've started to work with them a little bit more closely. So like started to like do more outreach, like actually doing outbound, and either reaching out to a couple people who I follow on Twitter saying like, hey, I think you'd be a really good fit here, or even like on LinkedIn. But this is the first time I've ever done like any kind of outbound outreach. So that's currently how my thing works.
And you mentioned that this was mainly thanks to your Twitter account. So I think
Yeah.
we should definitely dive into the Twitter, which is called AI Pub. And for the people that are not familiar with it, if you're in the field, I think we can assume that you are familiar with it just because of all the reach that you've got in the recent, uh, I don't know, 6 7 months, or not that much.
Around there. I think it started in like September
Yeah,
20
and you've
three
got,
7.
I think that you've got something like 8 million reach or even more now.
Oh, I actually haven't checked the numbers in a long time. I know I have 60,000 followers,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah, definitely. I would assume the fastest growing Twitter account, especially in artificial intelligence. And you already explained a bit what you were doing, but could you go a bit more in detail of what is your goal with this Twitter account, as well as who is it for? Who should follow you and go check it out?
Yeah, I think again, like all of this is kind of an experiment. Like, it's kind of there's nothing really set in stone. So I'm kind of playing with a lot of different things. I'll start by saying like who is my target audience. I think target audience is like technical people who are in the industry or like very adjacent to the industry. So like people who are professional software engineers, people who are professional machine learning engineers, who either like read machine learning papers themselves or like kind of want to be kept abreast of it all. Um, so that my target audience is like generally technical people. And then what I'm kind of trying to do is cover technical AI topics at like a high level. So like research summaries, but like not going super deep in the weeds so that people can understand a lot of the high level concepts, without spending hours and hours going into the nitty gritty details. So there's just a lot of stuff that interests me. I think over the last couple months, it's mostly been just like summaries of research papers. For a while, I did this thing that I feel really bad about. I've just been so slammed with the recruiting, I haven't kept up with it. But like for a while, I did like a weekly Twitter thread that like
Yeah,
summarized all the things that happened this week on AI Twitter.
that must
I mean,
be crazy right now if you were to do one.
no, yeah, I feel terrible about this because I haven't done this in a couple of weeks because of the recruiting stuff. But yeah, like I don't even know how I would do that now because it's like the Twitter thread. Like you should probably do that Twitter thread every 2 days or something like
Yeah,
that at this point.
I've. Are you
Um,
familiar with Alpha Signal? The
yeah, oh, yeah,
Well,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So like he posted, I think it was Tuesday. Like he posted a summary of what happened Tuesday, and it was like more new things than what you were sharing in a weekly thread.
Yeah, no, it is. it's kind of I my emotions are very mixed. It's like very exciting, very overwhelming, a little bit terrifying, depending on how you think about the future. So I think all that stuff is interesting. I think one thing like I kind of want to explore in the future with the account is not just like research progress, but also talking about kind of like how AI or is affecting society or is affecting the economy or is affecting the startup scene. There's a podcast that's run by a friend that I really like that kind of covers all this stuff super well. It's called The Cognitive Revolution. And I think like my plate is kind of full right now, but I think if I get more bandwidth, I think I want to do more stuff like that because it's just a personal interest of mine. Like aside from just keeping up with the research papers, like I think this stuff is just going to be so transformative for society and
Yeah.
like even just like walking around or driving or doing errands, like
Mm.
I'm just thinking about like what's the economy going to be look like in 3 years or like how how are going to people going to have to adapt, what should be people be doing to like ride that wave
Yeah.
well, adapt. So I think like that's also a direction I kind of want to take the account once I get more bandwidth. And I
And
think
that
my
would be,
followers would be really interested because I think there's a thing that's on like everyone's mind right now. Anyone who's following GPT-4 or any of this stuff, like they're thinking about this kind of thing.
yeah, exactly. And as you just said it, but I think that would be extremely relevant to technical people that usually don't think about this stuff, but they are developing those models and working with them and etc. But they are for sure interested in what will happen and how it affects society, but they don't have really the time to investigate or think about it. So it will definitely be a great transition for you, I think. Well, just because you already are building the, to my mind, the perfect audience that should be um, sensibilized with that. So that would be definitely great to see. I'd love to see that.
Yeah, if I'll just say one thing. I think there are like all these different like media niches, even like within machine learning. Like there's kind of like machine learning for like people who don't have a technical background that just want to be kept abreast of the news.
Yeah,
I'm trying to do like a more technical audience, but even within a more technical audience, there's so many different like niches. Like I think one thing that would be really cool that I haven't seen too much of, maybe to some degree, is like a media outlet like specifically for AI tools, just like for developers, like just like and you keep it really simple, but just keeping software developers and machine learning engineers like abreast with just like the best tools that they could be using in their work.
mm,
Like even something like that would just be so extraordinarily valuable. So I'm not doing that, but I think it would be really cool if someone did.
yeah, definitely. It's crazy how I don't know if it like it wasn't like this. I feel like in with the internet in the beginning, but it's crazy now how any very niche topic can blow up and work really well.
Yeah. No, I think we're both on Twitter. Like one of my favorite accounts is this guy called Strip Mall Guy. I think he's like kind of famous on Twitter, and he's this guy, and he only tweets about like buying and flipping strip malls and like renovating strip malls, and I think he has like 100,000 followers or something like that. So there's people like this all over. Um,
Yeah, it's so cool. You can like any passion that you have or just something that you do, you can share about it, and some other person will certainly be interested.
do you have like a favorite like weird or niche Twitter account? I don't mean to if I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I'm curious.
You kind of are because I'm a really bad Twitter user. So I actually wanted to like this was part of my questions that I actually skipped, but I will ask them. So since whatever, um, for myself personally, but also anyone else that is listening, because I just give a small background to my question. It's basically all my friends and the people I know, like because I assume it may be because we are from a small city and here it's French, not in English or something. But nobody is using Twitter. Like back in the days, it was Facebook, and now it's Messenger. Nobody is using Twitter or even have an account. How would you convince them that Twitter is useful, or like why is Twitter useful, and why should they be on there?
Yeah, I would say two things on a high level, and it just depends. So some people don't have these interests, but I think the two things that are most useful that are kind of separate are one professional, and then two just keeping abreast of news. Um, professional, like just the networking that you can do, not in like a weird sleazy way, but just like meeting people who are in your niche,
Yeah.
is just wild, and it's just so much better than LinkedIn. Like LinkedIn is the site where you're supposed to be doing this, but like I don't know, like people don't really like hang out and have genuine conversations on LinkedIn, or like people, like I don't know, it's not,
Yeah,
it's
it's
much less
professional.
social. It's much more like genuine on Twitter. So I think if you're interested in doing that, like, uh, you know, you should try it out. And there are just crazy stories of like people who've made crazy professional progress by just going on Twitter.
Mm.
So I think there's professional, and then the other is just like I think it's the best place to get news, across a variety of niches. You can just find all of these random people who are like domain experts. Again, it's like, I follow like Jan LeCun and like Sam Altman, but like I also follow like Strip Mall Guy or like
Yeah.
Balaji, and it's like this really cool, like it's kind of like you craft your own newspaper that you get every morning from like all of these different like niche experts on exactly what you want to learn about.
Yeah.
So I and also just like empirically, like the quality of information you get, is frankly higher and faster than what you'd get out of traditional media. I think with like a lot of political issues, things like COVID, things like inflation, at least in the US, like Twitter, at least I found, was way ahead of the curve,
Mm.
on like finding up to date info about this stuff. So I think it's just even keeping abreast of what's going on, like Twitter's great.
Yeah, once you spend the time to craft your list or like the people that you are following, this seems like a really good tool to stay informed in, as you said, all niche, all most important subject for you. So definitely. And coming back to just before we I forget, coming back to your AI pub, the Twitter account, this specific Twitter account, how how would you say that, like how are you balancing the need to share super cutting edge research like in your weekly reviews, but also need to communicate the need to communicate them simply and make it accessible? Like, how is it for you? Is it difficult to share the most advanced algorithm while making it accessible, and all this in Twitter? It's like basically really short threads. So what are the challenges, and how are you doing that?
Yeah, it's definitely hard. I mean, the biggest challenge is just volume, and I don't just don't even pretend to be a source of like all of the cutting edge stuff. It's more I feel like I'll pick out a gem every once in a while, and maybe
Yeah.
help some people understand it. But it's like there's just, even if I was doing my job like 10x better, like I just, being able to cover just all of the things that are coming out is just like really really hard.
Mm.
So for me, like the biggest challenge is just volume, and also pace. Like just, a paper will come out, day n, like if you can figure out what's going on in it and summarize it on day n plus one, like that's great, but sometimes it's just hard to do. um I actually, like, in some ways I don't actually find there's a ton of tension between, there's this question, like kind of explaining the research versus, crafting a Twitter thread, in some ways, like you're kind of compressing information, and how much information is lost when you do that.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I don't find there's like a huge trade-off there, because at least what I'm expressly trying to do is kind of trying to do some of that lossy compression.
Yeah.
So for me, like what I'm trying to do is trying to kind of distill as much as I can in the paper into something that could be a Twitter thread, or could be explained
Yeah.
in, a page or two of writing. I think for other people who are going much deeper into the technical weeds, or like are, trying to explain things for people who have much more of a background, I think there's more of a trade-off. But for me, not as much. And that's kind of why I like Twitter. Like I like that there's, at least to some degree in the UI, like the 240 character limit, because it really actually imposes, a constraint of being succinct and pithy,
Yeah.
and like just really summarizing like the key ideas. Um, so I
and
don't actually find a huge tension there personally. It's really
and that's
funny actually, because I feel like, oh sorry, I feel like for people who don't use Twitter, there historically has been this reputation of Twitter as like this kind of like, kind of like low IQ
yeah.
like platform. It's like, oh yeah, it's just 140 characters. Like, what kind of intellectual content are you going to get there? And it's like, surprise, actually no, it's like one of the best places to learn. So it seems like there's a trade-off there, but at least I haven't found it personally.
Hmm. Yeah, indeed. And making stuff simple is also a super useful skill for just professionals in general. So, would you have any tips based on how you personally do that to for anyone to improve on explaining their research or their own work more simply?
Well, that's hard. Well, the first thing that's kind of obvious advice is get on Twitter. It's really funny. It's like a lot of the research that ends up getting the most attention or like most follow-up work is just the research that gets shared on Twitter because everyone's using Twitter as their source of info. So I feel
Hmm.
like the first and most obvious source of advice is like just go on Twitter and like every time you publish research, like dedicate a good deal of time to making like a really good Twitter thread with photos and media and stuff that explains what you did at a high
Yeah.
level. Um, Otherwise, in terms of summarizing, I don't feel like I have like super interesting thoughts there. It's like write short sentences, kind of space it out, like
Yeah, well, I
sharply.
think those are already great insights. Just basically, I think it's interesting to force yourself to cut some words, like make it more concise by intention. This will just allow you to practice your brain to even verbalize things more simply in the general life, just because you are doing that, you are
Yeah,
forcing yourself to do that.
I have like one more thought here, which is trying to condense something to like three major ideas or like trying to understand why something is obvious. It's I When I was an undergrad, I was like really interested in doing math, and I was mentored by this like really awesome mathematician. And like one of the pieces of advice he had, like even for like extremely technical work, these are like math papers, which are like way harder to read than machine learning papers. This is totally esoteric, like very awfully put together often. His advice was often like there are three major ideas, and like your goal reading this like really hard esoteric thing is to just figure out what those like three major ideas are. So like kind of deliberately approaching your explanations or your reading from the perspective of like what are the three bullet points that explain this whole
Yeah,
thing, or the other kind of like useful intuition is like why is this obvious, like because the funny thing is like all this intellectual work, like some really interesting paper comes out, sometimes it seems like this incredible technical feat or like this leap of genius of the mind, um but to the person who discovered it, it was obvious, right? Like to the person who discovered it, it was actually very intuitive. So then sometimes I feel like the goal of either coming to understand the stuff well or explain it well is trying to like figure out, like trying to reverse engineer the headspace to the point where the work becomes obvious. So you kind of
yeah.
asking yourself the question, like, why is this really intuitive? Even if it seems hard, like, what's the intuition behind it? Um, I guess I don't know. These are two ideas I learned from math that,
Yeah, they are good tips. And also what you mentioned with using external media like images or videos or even just real world example, just like something that anyone can understand but you can compare. That's extremely good to just make things sound simpler and more understandable. I think, well, most professors do that. They start with, well, most good professors do that. They start with a real world example, a real life, like they talk about tennis or whatever, and then they talk about math.
whether you like it or not, a lot of this stuff is marketing. Like
Yeah,
you do the research that's making the product, but then in order to get people to pay attention to it, it's marketing. So learning the basics of copywriting and all these kind
yeah.
of marketing things that a lot of people are averse to, it's useful.
Exactly. And just like selling yourself in an interview or anything, it's all about marketing.
Yep.
So you mentioned that you were mainly staying up to date with Twitter and yeah, Twitter. And so is there, since you are yourself a Twitter account trying to share news in AI and well, mainly in AI, are there any other tools that you are using to help stay up to date, or newsletters, or I don't know, YouTube accounts, or anything else than Twitter accounts? Or if there are other useful Twitter accounts that you can share?
Yes. Okay, so I don't want to like play favorites here, but I'm a little bit sleep deprived today, so I'm sure like some great accounts are gonna skip my memory. Nonetheless, a couple that come to mind. Dar AI, or I don't know how you pronounce it, but Dare AI is like
There, yeah.
really really good. They I feel like there are just actually a lot of Twitter accounts that are now just doing a better job at what I'm trying to do than I am. So I think like Dare AI is really really good. They're doing weekly paper summaries, which is like super cool. So if you're trying to keep up to date with research, like I think it's every Sunday they publish a thread where it's like, hey, here are like the top 10 like papers that came out this week, and here's like one or two sentences about like what they contain. So Dare AI is really good. Alpha Signal, weekly newsletter with kind of like some of the top AI papers. That's really cool. I really liked Dr. Jim Fan. He's on Twitter. He makes like really cool explainer threads of various AI research stuff. And then another kind of follow that I really like that's a little bit different from the research stuff, is this podcast called The Cognitive Revolution that I
Yeah.
mentioned. Is run by this guy Nathan Lebenz, who's just a great guy, and it covers some AI research stuff, but also just like how AI is affecting society, and they like interview some of the top like startup founders or like VCs in the space, and also researchers. So it's like more of a kind of like broad uh, like podcast that I think is good. And they also have like a Substack or a newsletter.
Mm.
Not exactly sure on that, or they do have one. I mostly just listen to the podcast.
I will also add just it's basically the only with yours, and I follow Alpha Signal, AI Pub, and one other Twitter page account. Um, this is mainly interesting for people into research, AI research, and even more towards like researchers applying those research. But it's obviously AK that
Oh
I
yeah,
assume
yes,
you already
exactly.
know. But this
Yeah.
this was a
Yeah.
game changer to me like a few I think years ago now. Well, and it's definitely cool. He basically shares every new relevant papers and even non-relevant, but like any new papers with a short one-liner that is usually taken from the abstract, but still a short useful one-liner to know what's the paper about with a picture. And it's just really cool to be easily to have easy updates on the new papers, the new like thousands of daily papers. So that's a really good one, I feel like.
Yep, totally agree. Totally forgot. Another person who's in a similar vein is Iran Kamatsuzaki. He's doing a machine learning PhD at Georgia Tech. I think he's finishing up. And he does similar stuff. Like he posts a lot of papers and kind of summaries of papers.
Oh, awesome.
He's
I
he's
didn't know
also
that
like,
one.
oh, I'm sure you do. He's very active on AI
Okay,
Twitter.
I must have seen it, but
Yeah.
my memory is extremely bad anyway, so I probably know him, but yeah. To continue on Twitter, since this is the pretty much the main topic of the past 30 minutes or so, I have still follow up questions on this, and it's also for people like me that maybe do not understand Twitter enough, and it's more about growth. So a very short question that may be extremely hard to answer is how to do a viral Twitter post.
Oh, that's well put. I don't mean to toot my own horn too much, but I do actually think I've gotten good at this. Especially at the
Yeah, I
beginning.
definitely did.
Yeah, now I've been actually kind of like slammed with some of this recruiting stuff and other things I'm doing, so I actually haven't been focused on growing my Twitter account. But yeah, like first couple months, it was like very deliberate, very focused on it, and I think I did a very good job. Yeah, I think so. There are a lot of thoughts. How do you write? Yeah, so there. I mean, and maybe this is too vague or too broad, but I think you got to get like three things right. I think one, getting the audience right, like kind of, it's kind of like finding product market fit. It's like finding like info audience fit, like being really deliberate. Like think like a business. Like ask who are your customers and ask like what do they actually want, like what would help them, like what do they actually care about, rather than like what's exactly interesting to you, because
Yeah,
often like there's very subtle differences in that. um so like kind of like finding like a niche audience, or once you have an audience, like figuring out exactly who that is, and like really being deliberate, like what would actually be very useful to them. And thinking about that. I think so. So the second is content, like finding content that's interesting and relevant. um I think one thing that I definitely found is posting like long form content. um that's like really thought out and valuable, like occasionally, does much better than really frequently posting content that's not necessarily like stuff that you have added, or like reposting stuff or just like
Yeah,
sharing a random thing. I think like there's a huge return. Like one of the reasons I actually don't post too much on Twitter is because like often it takes me like several hours to write a single thread, because it's like I'll read the paper, like come up with some of the major ideas and all that. Like it takes a long time. So I think like, figuring out what your audience wants, then like doing really like long form valuable stuff in that domain, that's like detailed and helpful. And then the third thing, you kind of have to get all of these right too, because I feel like if you get one of them wrong, like it really, you don't grow as much, or you don't get as much views. The last is just like kind of straightforward, like marketing, copywriting stuff. So it's like, just the way you structure your sentences, or like the way you structure your tweets. Like each, have each tweet like not have a ton of text in it. Like have each tweet ideally just contain one idea. Structure your sentences so that they're like short, easy to follow. Structure your sentences so that they're kind of interesting. So it's like you have one idea, and then the next idea is like a plot twist, or like, you don't want it to be too monotonic or
yeah,
too kind of dry. And then also including media, like including like images for each tweet. Like these kind of subtle things actually end up mattering a lot. So I think maybe that's not super explanatory, but that's kind of my like high level view. It's like you get audience info fit. Think about what your audience actually wants. Like think about them like a customer. How can you serve them? Long form detailed stuff, and then like doing the copywriting and the images and stuff.
and how much time did it take when you were trying to really grow on Twitter, like per day or per week, approximately?
It really depends. Like I wouldn't say actually a ton of time, honestly. I think like I think when I was starting, maybe like 10 hours a week or something like that. Um, because I was doing well, actually, maybe more than that. Because I think like when I was starting out, even when I was starting out and I was growing really fast, like I wasn't actually posting that much stuff. I was posting like twice a week, basically. Like I would post roughly every week, like one long form explainer thread on like some cool paper or some cool machine learning topic. And then I would do like a weekly like summary of the stuff that happened in
Yeah,
AI or AI research. And each of those, okay, maybe it's actually a little bit over 10. Like the the summary thing, I think even to put the thread together would take like a couple hours. But then throughout the course of the week, I would just save all of the links that I found on
yeah,
Twitter, so you have to like filter through that. So maybe it's like 15 hours, something like that. And then writing a thread on a paper, like maybe it's like 7 hours or something like that. Like you find the paper, you print it. Yeah, I'm boring. You actually read it on paper and mark it up. That can take a couple hours to really understand, and then writing the thread and doing all the like the copywriting. Like I think a lot of people just don't like doing this because it's actually kind of boring. Like just getting the images right and getting the sentences right, like that actually takes a good deal of time. So
yeah.
I think for me it was like 10 to 15 hours a week, something like that.
And right now, how long does it take you?
uh, I think I'm actually spending maybe a similar amount of time because I'm also doing a podcast now. Maybe a little bit less than 10, something like 10, I would say, something like that.
Yeah, that is it's not really that many hours to get that much views and just so many opportunities.
Oh
It's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
definitely less than we think.
Total life hack. Like even someone who's just have a full-time job, you
Yeah,
do like a
definitely
couple
doable.
hours a week, like, and it totally changes your life.
Indeed. And you mentioned cool research papers, but how do you decide if they are cool or worth sharing? You said that you have to see as if you were basically sharing with customers, but it's still you in the end you still have to decide if you are explaining a paper or not. So how do you take these decisions?
Yeah, I think in terms of finding the papers, I'm maybe just a little bit more selfish. I think I'm actually thinking less from the audience perspective, but it's more
Likewise.
like I'm just using my own taste or my own judgment. It's kind of like with even with math, like people just have different tastes. Some
Mm,
people like analysis, other people like number theory or something. And with machine learning papers, like it's just kind of like what I find most interesting. And typically, what I find most interesting is like I would say less like really cool demos or something, or like a really impressive state of the art result or something. But I think what I find very interesting is like papers that open up new paradigms, or papers that kind of have something to say about the long term direction of AI research. I also like, to some degree, I'm a kind of an AGI believer, like maybe even short timelines type person. So like I also find papers that kind of like play into that
Yeah,
thing very interesting. So it's like some of the papers that I've covered recently on the podcast that I have found really interesting are like tool former. So it's like, okay, that's like just directly societally relevant.
yeah,
Or like, recently did one on hungry hippos, which is like a new language modeling architecture that like has much better scaling with the context length. So like stuff like that, like where it's like, oh, if you get that right, then the language models are going to get way better. So it's mostly my taste. I think I'm mostly interested in language models, or like foundation models that incorporate language. So
mhm.
I think there's also a lot more bias towards that than like vision.
Yeah. You definitely have a bias, just like me on YouTube. I share what I find interesting and what I like. But I think that's a good thing. It also gives personality to your Twitter account, and if people enjoy what you seem to be sharing, well, they won't be disappointed since you will keep sharing similar stuff. So
Yeah, yeah. There's always, and I think this is kind of an interesting trend in like media. There's always this like interesting tension that I've seen between kind of doing like writing for yourself or producing media for yourself that's like unique to your character, and like sort of serving your audience as if you were a business or a servant, or kind of like a more of a giving mentality. Because you kind of have to do both. Like if you're just so obsessed with like what you think is cool, like actually often people don't care. Like it's just not interesting to other people. But then on the other side, like there's definitely a phenomenon among like influencers of like audience capture, where it's like they start doing something that's really interesting and unique, but then they find that their audience actually wants more clickbait, and then like over time they end up just becoming like a clickbait
yeah,
channel, or they end up just being completely transformed and captured by their audience. So it's definitely something that you have to like think about.
yeah. And speaking of audience, how are you engaging with your Twitter audience, or just building some kind of real engaged community rather than just being an anonymized Twitter account that doesn't talk to them? Do you do anything more specific than sharing your weekly posts or all your posts?
Well, I'm doing a much worse job than you are because you actually run a community. I feel like I could actually improve a lot in this respect. I think insofar as I'm doing anything community oriented, I think it's actually much less like scalable. Or it's very like, I think I'm actually doing more like in person stuff. So like
Yeah,
occasionally I'll host events. I feel bad because it's like they're in SF. Like if you're not in SF, but like I'll host events, or I'll sponsor events that are like open to anyone who wants to show up. And then some of the recruiting stuff is also like useful. So like a lot of the stuff that I've been doing community wise is like in person, where it's like there are just people who I've been chatting with in the DMs for like a couple months, and they're like looking for a job in this area, and like I'll help them out, or just like connecting people. But it's very like non-scalable, like relative to, I don't know.
do you have any plan in creating something that is more oriented towards some kind of community and where people can help each other, or you can help them more easily than in person? Because of course in person is like the best thing, but as you said, it's definitely not scalable.
To be honest, not really. Like right now, I feel like I'm still like figuring out all this recruiting stuff. I'm like a little bit slammed, just with all the things that are going on. So I
Yeah,
don't. I think one thing that I've tried to do with the account is like, if I'm doing anything, I want to do like a really good job. So I don't feel like I do a very good job with the community thing right now. So there's nothing on my docket.
yeah, that makes sense. You are just prioritizing and focusing on other stuff that is more important to you, and that's just perfectly fine. And well, speaking of managing the Twitter account, is there any challenges or difficult things that we people that are not really good with Twitter or are not managing such a popular Twitter account, yeah, sorry, I will just reform it. Are there any challenges that we do not expect to see from
That's
managing such popular
for
Twitter
managing
account?
its Twitter account.
something that maybe you didn't expect at the beginning yourself,
It,
that takes you more time than expected, or
yeah, I mean, I think, well, I would say two things. One is it depends on what kind of account you're running. Like if you're running a newsletter, for example, I know people who are running like daily AI newsletters. You just
yeah,
have
I
to keep
used
up.
to.
Yeah, you have to keep up. You have to every day put that out. Like there are people who are depending on you.
Yeah,
I feel fortunate enough that like kind of what I'm doing can be at my own pace. So it's like if I'm really slammed, like I'll just I won't post something about a research paper that week.
yeah,
So I don't have it as much of that pressure, but I think other people would experience that. I think the main thing for me that's also true of like some of the recruiting stuff is just like inbound and just like DMs. I feel so bad. I'm like I and it's also a skill, so it's like it becomes hard, but then you get better at it. I still like not good at it, but it's just like you get a lot of like inbound and a lot of people are like, "Oh, can you share this?" And I'm kind of like,
yeah,
I don't really know. Like just lots of people who want to share things to you or like, "Do you want to sponsor this event?" Or like with recruiting too. The funny thing is like recruiting is like it's a pretty unsexy business. So there aren't actually like that many people. It's so funny. It's like there's so many AI startups, so many AI VCs. Really not that many AI recruiters. Like I kind of don't know of any. So then if you start to get a reputation as like the guy who does AI recruiting, like a lot of people will just come to you and they're like, "Can you send us candidates?" Or so I just kind of keeping up with that. I'm trying to do a better job.
that's really cool. So you are a pioneer in this subfield.
A little bit, yeah, to some degree. I don't know.
And that's also the main way you manage to monetize your Twitter account, right? Were there any other ways that you succeeded in making money through that, like that's such a big amount of views that you got?
That's the only way I've done it so far. I For a while I started a job board. I had like a job board.
Yeah,
What I found is that I don't know, like, because again, I kind of was talking about like how recruiting is pretty non-scalable, and like I will recruit for startup CEOs, and they'll tell me that they just don't even look at their job submissions anymore. So then I was kind of like, man, like even if you could make money doing this, like, are you really helping? So I had this job board for a little bit, but I kind of just it wasn't clear if I was actually getting anyone a job from it. So that was the main way I've kind of approached monetization. I don't know if it's the best way. Recruiting, especially in AI, is very high ticket. If you charge a 20% placement fee, and someone gets paid a salary of $150,000, it's $30,000. So it's the ticket size is very high. The one thing is very non-scalable. So it's like I just spend a lot of time like sending people emails or like pinging founders or like hopping on calls with people. Whereas I think like a lot of the ways that people tend to monetize media uh, via sponsorships or like ads or things like that are like much more scalable, right? It's like if you have a newsletter, someone just like clicks something to post on your job board or like post a
yeah.
something. It doesn't take an additional time on your end. I think if your audience is interested or like I have thought about this stuff, like I do think about this like a business and do actually think about making money. One thing that I think you could just make tons of money from that I haven't experimented from, but I've seen other people do is like events. There's just so much demand for events in this space, like hackathons or things like that.
But real world events, right? Because I've seen like a drastic drop in online events attendance. Just for myself, I'm not really that interested in online events anymore. I think we've just all did I forgot the word, but we had way too much
You
online
kind of
events during
overdosed.
COVID and
Yeah.
everything. So yeah, I think a lot of people are super into real world events now, even more than before COVID maybe. And I assume that's what you meant by events and hackathon, like mainly in person.
Yeah, I would say in person. And like I'm not an expert here and like I'm so busy that I'm like not doing this personally, but it's like the economics are really interesting, because
Yeah,
it's like you can like even a hackathon, you don't charge anyone anything to show up. Like often you can get the event space for free from a sponsor. And then you have like 50 people who will 50 different companies to sponsor the event for like $2,000 or something. It's like surprise, you've made $100,000 in a day. And I've just seen this like events space, and I've started to talk to some people who like do this professionally, and it's like really
Mm.
interesting. So.
Yeah. Also, I went to. I don't know if you know about AI for.
Oh
Like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
yeah, it's an in-person event with lots of professionals, and these events, the tickets are like extremely expensive. It's for companies to basically learn about other companies and connect and like find opportunities. And I'm pretty sure it makes a lot of money. I don't know personally, but it seems it seems quite beneficial.
Yeah.
And okay, so my last questions about Twitter, then I will just conclude with some other questions about your other projects and you. But um, so Twitter, we all know about like Elon Musk and Trump and everything going on with Twitter. So yeah, do you have to handle some controversies or like polarizing topics, or and if you do, how do you handle those, or can you just completely like not respond and not do anything about that?
I think at least for me, the niche that I'm in, I don't have to engage with any of that stuff, which I feel very fortunate about. And I
Yeah,
actually try to avoid it because it's like I think a lot of people are following me for like AI research, so it's like if I started to post about political stuff or start liking political things, like I just think people wouldn't like it. So I'm
yeah,
I'm very fortunate. I think like people are following me, they want AI research. They don't, they follow other people for Trump or Elon.
awesome. And that definitely makes sense as well. I don't have any issues either, but I'm also much smaller on Twitter. I'm just basically sharing my videos, so it's not really a good way of using Twitter. But anyways, I completely understand that. And my I wanted to talk a bit about your podcast, but you already mentioned what you are doing on there. And I've also listened to the recent one with the two the two people, I don't remember the name, but the two people from OpenAI, which was really
Oh
cool.
yeah, yeah.
And yeah, I was just I
GPT.
wanted to talk just a little bit about the podcast because I'm now hosting one as well, and just maybe that could be interesting to some people because um, we know that podcasts are becoming incredibly popular. Like a lot of, even myself, everyone is listening to podcasts. I assume you are too. Well, you mentioned that you were listening to one, so we all are listening to podcasts. And so, some of our audience may want to even create one themselves if they are interested into that. That's also a good way to be online, to have an online presence. And so, what's to you the most challenging thing about hosting a podcast?
Oh, I don't have a good answer here because I feel like I have a very fortunate setup. So the podcast was actually proposed to me by the CEO of this model monitoring company,
Yeah,
Arise AI. So this is this guy. He's crazy. He runs this huge AI company, huge AI startup. He's working around the clock. He also, his name's Jason Lopetegui. He also manages to find time to like just read AI papers. Like I don't know how he does it, but he reads AI research like on a day-to-day basis. So he actually reached out to me and he's like, "Hey, let's do this podcast." So for me, it's actually been very easy because he has a marketing team where basically we do the recording, but then his marketing team is absolutely excellent and they'll handle some of like the editing and things like that. I think for me, the hard part. Or typically the hard part with doing podcast and media is just a lot of the editing stuff and the
yeah,
marketing things like that. Fortunately, I do not have to handle that. On my end, like, and the funny thing is even the format of the podcast is not that hard because it's I don't even have to talk too much because I'm interviewing AI
yeah,
researchers, so just ask them about the paper. So really the only hard part for me is just is actually reading the papers.
yeah,
But that's pretty fun for me. So typically I'll read the paper in advance and come up with some high level questions. I've actually I was like really hesitant to take on the podcast because I didn't I wanted to do a really good job with it, and I thought it would be really hard, but it hasn't been super hard. I think
yeah.
I'm
I think you
I
are
want to
doing a
increase
great
the
job.
volume. I want to increase the volume again. We're doing something like once every 3 weeks or something. I
Yeah,
think a lot of really good podcasts are doing like once a week. So I think if we could up the volume, that would be cool.
yeah, that would be cool. I'd love that as well myself. And what you mentioned that you like doing that, and there are no, like, there aren't big challenges for you just reading the papers. That takes time, obviously, and coming up with the questions, which I, for a tip for anyone that hosts an interview, I think that, like, of course you need to draft some questions and think about the person, and do some research. But also, I've done that in the past. It doesn't, it is the vast minority of my questions, but I have also asked some AIs like ChatGPT to generate more questions given the background of someone and some
No, they're
question
actually
examples.
really. That's a really good idea.
Yeah,
Should
it's
use.
for real.
Actually
It
brilliant.
works pretty good. Like, it's quite repetitive, but if you ask it, you will definitely it will definitely come up with at least one interesting question that you haven't thought of. So
Yeah,
definitely worth
especially
it.
with GPT-4 and the long context length. Like,
Yeah,
I see. I feel terrible. I haven't used these tools like a ton in my day to day work, but it's just the value add is so obvious. Like,
yeah,
especially with the long context length of GPT-4, like you could just copy paste like a whole paper in it, or even just take a screenshot of the paper and just say like, hey, what are some cool high level questions that you'd have about this?
yeah,
You know?
yeah. I've just started using it. Well, I'm using it more and more now. It's funny because it's my PhD professor that is pushing his students, well, us, to use GPT more. So
Yeah.
it's really, it's crazy. I wouldn't think that a professor would actually recommend using an AI to write and code, but he's doing that, and it's extremely powerful. Of course, you need to double check and, like, be sure that it's fine, but it's really helpful, especially for me that, and other people that are not native English speaker. It's so good to just, like, for example, I write an article, and then I just copy paste it and ask to keep the information the same but rephrase it, and it
Oh, interesting.
transforms it into,
Oh,
like, a
that's
very professional article written by, like, with a perfect English, perfect grammar, everything.
so
So
cool.
it's that's pretty cool.
This is like truly magical technology. That's
Yeah,
that's so wild.
yeah. And yeah, what you enjoy most about hosting a podcast?
I think I just like talking to people. I think it's really cool to like talk to the people who are actually figuring this stuff out or actually building these systems. I feel very fortunate that I can kind of at least make a living understanding and following a lot of high level trends that really matter to me. So I just feel very fortunate to like be able to at least spend a good chunk of my time like reading
Yeah,
papers and thinking about it. Yeah, I think the coolest thing is just being able to follow these trends, and also like talk to the people because they have like really insightful things to say,
yeah.
and they're also really good communicators. I feel like especially like um, the last episode on Tool Former, I just put it out like this week, like especially Timo just like gave a really good explanation. Like he was just really good and kind of lively communicator. So I think this is also just fun.
Are you planning on interviewing other kind of background than researchers with their research papers?
Yes, I don't actually know who I'm gonna do next. I don't know who's next. I
But
want to maybe do something that's not just language models because I'm really into this stuff, but I feel like maybe I cover it too much. It's like obviously the next obvious candidate would be GPT-4, but if you read the paper, they don't really want to talk about what they did.
yeah,
So I don't know if they're the right people to interview.
but are you
I
planning?
just also want to say I don't mean that I don't mean to say that to like knock OpenAI and
No, no,
they're
of course, of course.
they're incredible, but
No, it's really incredible what they did, and yeah, obviously. And I mainly wanted to ask if you were planning to change a bit your interviews, like not only cover research papers, but maybe get people from startups or anything different in the AI world, or will this just stick? You will stick with research papers for this particular podcast?
I think for this particular podcast, probably just stick with research papers. Again, there's just this whole thing where I think that kind of the AI media space is pretty underserved. There's so much that I would like to do that like I don't exactly have bandwidth to do. Like I think there's so much more to do in the space. I
Yeah,
don't mean to like shill this one podcast too much, but I just do really like them. I do think the Cognitive Revolution is doing a really good job there. But yeah, I think there would be a ton of cool stuff just to like interview people about like machine learning careers. Like just like interview people who's like a machine learning tech lead or like a machine learning manager and talk about like how did they get there, like what actually matters, like in terms of learning on the job or getting a good job. Um, there's one guy who's on machine learning Twitter. I hope I get his name right, or like I'm not sure if I exactly remember his name, but I think his name is Alexa Gordic. He's at DeepMind. I think he
Yeah,
recently is taking a break from DeepMind, but like his
yeah,
story is really cool, where he kind of took an alternate path to get into being a research engineer at DeepMind, and like doing an interview with him would be like super cool. Just like how did you do that? How do you pull that off?
indeed. Yeah, I'm
But I don't think I'll
actually
get to it. Or
I will actually have him on the podcast. In he's taking a break in Japan, I believe, for a few months, and then in I believe in May we will have a podcast together. So
oh, cool. I
yeah,
look
he
forward
has
to
a great background. Okay, speaking of GPT generated questions, I
it.
think this is the question that GPT gave me, and I really liked it. I had to rephrase it, but it had a really good ID, and so I will read it just to keep the credit to GPT. Um, since you are really active on there, how has social media impacted the way AI research is communicated and shared with the broader public? And I can like maybe specialize to Twitter. Like how would you see Twitter? How are you seeing Twitter modifying the way research is shared compared to
Yeah.
the past?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting question. I think I can comment less on how the research gets shared to the public because I just kind of don't know. I don't know if I have anything to say that's not kind of obvious. I mean, one thing that is just totally true is there's kind of this formal reality of how AI research gets disseminated, and then there's the actual reality. Like there's all these conferences, all these journals and stuff. But then
Yeah,
you talk to any of these researchers, and they're kind of like none of this stuff matters anymore. It's like it does matter, especially if you're trying to further your academic career. You put NeurIPS or ICLR on your resume or something, but insofar as like what are people actually using to keep up to date, like the top researchers in the space, it's just Twitter. It's really like it's the place that people are using to learn about what's going on. So I feel like that's kind of my only observation is like it's actually even if it's not formally the mechanism that people are using to aggregate a lot of the most interesting work, it's I think factually what people use. And then as a result, like I do think you can totally change the impact of your work by just focusing on marketing on Twitter.
yeah,
And there's kind of a there's a weird ethical line to tread here where it's like maybe you will increase the breadth of your or kind of the extent of the replication of your research by making lots of like clickbaity threads about your research or like making lots of threads that kind of overstate the promises of the results of your research. I think that's true.
mm,
But nonetheless, I think it's like a lot of the research that really gets followed up on is the stuff that does well on Twitter. So if you're an academic, I think it actually is quite imperative if you want to,
yeah.
if you actually think your work is worth following up on to like, make Twitter threads about it and things.
Yeah, I don't have the reference, but there has been a study as well where like the researchers shared on Twitter the half of the papers and didn't share the other half, and it clearly had an impact. The Twitter paper clearly had an impact in the reads, obviously, but it even had an impact in the number of citations the paper had. So that's I don't know if it's a good thing, but it's definitely worthwhile to share it on Twitter if you have published a paper. But yeah, speaking of a good thing or not, would you say that Twitter has a positive impact on the research and the research industry? Like the
That's really hard to say. I don't think I'm an expert. Like I did a year of a machine learning PhD. I definitely can read and understand these things at a high level, but like I'm not, I'm not, a tenured professor. I'm not,
yeah,
someone who's done really world-class research at DeepMind or something. So I don't actually feel like I'm qualified to comment. Um, I think the one like meta comment I would have is generally in life, I don't think of things as being like single valued, but I think of them as being kind of like multi-dimensional or vector valued. So insofar as I wouldn't know if it's like good or bad, but I think on various dimensions it would be good or bad. So it's like one
Yeah,
dimension would be like, yeah, probably the more clickbaity stuff like gets shared more and people believe in it. Like maybe that's bad. But then also like it's very it's in many ways very democratized. Like truly, if you're like on the other side of the globe and you do cool research and like you write a cool Twitter thread about it, like people will see it. And like that's really cool. So like that would be one area where I think it's really good. It
yeah,
definitely, I think,
definitely.
lowers the barrier to entry. Like
Mm,
a lot of these kind of old boys clubs, don't matter as much anymore.
for sure, for sure. And so my last question is, you already talked a lot about this, so I assume we already know the answer, but still I want to ask it. It's basically, well, it's twofold, very simple. It's just, what is your next project or like current obsession that you are working on, and also what would you like the people to know or follow from you?
Um, Next project, what I'm working on, I feel kind of weird. It's not super related to Twitter, but it's kind of an outgrowth of the recruiting stuff. Is there's this one company I'm really excited about. They're doing really well. They're trying to hire like top 1% talent. Trying to be careful about what I say about them, so I won't mention who they are.
Yeah,
But if things work out, I think I'm gonna not like work for them as an employee, but like partner more closely and just like try to fill a ton of their roles. So that for me is like a kind of interesting experience where it's more high pressure and it's just definitely like it's different from what I've been doing in the past because in the past I've just been this like
definitely.
passive matchmaker. Like people will show up and I'll be like, oh, I think you would enjoy this job. Whereas now it's like, okay, here's the org chart. Like here's all the roles we want to fill in the next like you know 4 months or something. Like let's do it. So I think that's one of the biggest projects that I'm approaching right now that I think will be really fun and really hard and really new to me. And what to follow me on Twitter or what to,
Yeah, would you like to mainly share your Twitter account, or maybe, well, this is undisclosed, so you cannot really talk about it that much, but like, I assume AI Pub is the best place to learn more about you and just follow your work. But would you like to share your recruiting platform, or
oh sure,
maybe
well,
just,
oh yeah, sure, yeah, I mean it's all kind of via Twitter. Like I don't have a newsletter, I don't have a website or anything, so if you just go to my Twitter page you'll find everything. I just it's all very simple. Like you just click on the link and it'll take you to the little form to submit your preferences for talent referrals. I have a personal Twitter account, but I don't really actually put much effort into it. Like I'm actually really deliberate. Like on my personal account, I just feel like I can post whatever, and I don't have a high bar. And a lot of it's just like totally random personal stuff. It's like experimenting with sleep or fitness or things like that. Or
oh,
I don't do this as much anymore. But I'll like post about books I'm reading. I was reading some like interesting math textbooks in the summer, so I was like posting about that. I'm like reading an interesting book on negotiation right now. So
is
uh,
it the one from the CIA agent, or?
No, I will maybe. Maybe this is the same guy. It's actually a really good book. It's called the title sounds very Machiavellian. The title is Bargaining for Advantage, and then the
Oh,
subtitle,
I think, yeah.
yeah, this the subtitle is Negotiation Strategies for Reasonable People. The book is much closer to the subtitle, where it's very like civil and
Yeah.
about being a good person and maintaining relationships and like that. But it's really good. I'm enjoying it. So.
Okay, then I forgot the name, obviously, but there's one called Negotiate something, and it's by an ex CIA agent, and it's like, I think it's the best book on negotiation,
Oh,
and it's just
okay.
applied to the real world, getting a job, your personal life, anything. It's incredibly good. It's a really good book. So it's,
I'm just opening a tab. I'm just curious. This is like
yeah, it would be
negotiation
good to
AI
find a name.
agent.
Yeah, Negotiate and CIA agent. You
Okay,
you should find it,
cool.
I
So
think.
just pulled it up. Never split the difference,
Yeah,
maybe.
exactly. That's the one. Yeah, a really good one.
Okay,
I strongly recommend.
cool.
But
Check it out.
awesome. So I might follow your private account, just because I'm really into better sleeping habits and sports in general, and just eating and everything, like Huberman and everything related to that. I'm super into. into this, and I'm also reading lots of book, and you seem to be reading similar format as I enjoy. So well, anyways, I'll definitely check that out as well. And I really invite anyone interested in AI a little bit. I assume you are, if you are still listening, to follow AI Pub on Twitter. It's a really amazing account, and I personally love it. And thank you very much, Baran, for your time. It was amazing to learn from you and chat with you. And yeah, a huge thanks for taking the time to be there.
No, thank you. This is like super fun. Really, really, really enjoyed this. So